Imagine if you could physically read history as it unfolds. Imagine if everything we are doing today and now had already happened. There is no way to prove this, of course, but there is also no way to disprove this. All across the world, there are megastructures, scripts, text, even proof of advanced machinery from a forgotten time in history. Are we doomed to repeat the process of advancing human knowledge and understanding at intervals in Earth's history, only to be blinded by greed every time? If so, then we truly will never really understand anything. Just wait till you hear this. Let us start with Atlantis. In the very distant past, there was a highly advanced, sophisticated global civilization. We can all at least agree with this, right? But just what happened here on Earth that dismantled this civilization? Would it surprise you if we were to tell you that there is evidence that a nuclear war broke out on Earth over 10,000 years ago? There is evidence for this. In both the Indian epics and in the Sumerian texts, they describe godlike weapons that held all the power in the universe. Two great cities in that of Sodom and Gomorrah were obliterated overnight according to the book of Genesis. And there is also descriptions of people being turned into pillars of salt, or dust basically. When America dropped the nukes over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there are numerous accounts of people who got vaporized in open spaces, but if you were behind a concrete building, the blast missed. These are similar to the accounts in the Bible. There are, in fact, numerous pieces of evidence that point to all-out war on Earth in the very remote past, and great changes on the Earth. This brought about the destruction of this worldwide civilization that appeared to have crumbled and fall into ruin. Only now we are beginning to pick through many thousands of years of lost history. It is as if we know the truth, but we are just slightly out of touching range at the moment. Even though the evidence is compelling and staring right at us in the face, it is just beyond our conscious understanding. This has caused great controversy. If you think to yourself, just where was Atlantis? Was it an island or a great city? Or was it a lost continent? The fact is, we just don't know for sure, but the evidence scattered across the globe gives us a great stepping stone that puts this fabled place well beyond that of just speculation. In today's world, most humans believe that we are the apex and that this is the pinnacle of Earth's civilization. Pretty ignorant, but it is not our fault that we think in this way. We have basically been programmed by the education process and religion to believe that we are in a state of never before. But there was a before time that was even greater than that of today, and there could even have been far greater civilizations that existed here millions of years ago. Doesn't that just blow your mind? We are only now coming out of the dark ages that resulted in the conscious mind being sent back into a primitive way of thinking, a survival state that still has trauma and fear, much like the way in which animals fear us humans today. In the remote past, it is said that gods walked the earth with men, and while the instructions from the invisible planes of nature were still laboring with the infant humanity of this planet, they chose from the sons of men the wisest and the truest, and with these enlightened ones they left with them the keys of their great wisdom, with which they founded what we now refer to as the ancient mysteries. When we think of advanced civilizations that we know existed, we start with the ancient Sumerians. The Sumerians were the world's first recorded highly advanced civilization where the scriptures survived in the form of the cuneiform text. Strangely, The Sumerians not only depicted our solar system, but they also depicted the planets in the correct scale. We only recently rediscovered Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, yet the Sumerians had this down between 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. Did they have access to some lost knowledge? You have to wonder. The first writings, the cuneiform, which there are over 500,000 of, by the way, was made to last. Just like the pyramids at Giza, these ancient texts were made to survive. But the translations are not as simple as any known language. In fact, they were completely undecipherable until recently. To this day, only around 17% of these texts have been loosely translated, predating the Bible by at least 4,000 years. They tell us that more than once, and in more than one place, that 432,000 years before the Great Flood, the Anunnaki came to the earth from Nibiru through the Great Bracelet, the bracelet being the asteroid belt, and landed in the Persian Gulf, where they began to mine the region for gold in order to save their own planet's failing atmosphere. It is thought that the gold would reflect solar weather, providing a heat shield and, in effect, repairing the atmosphere of their planet. The Anunnaki began to engineer a slave race on Earth by manipulating the DNA. They improved human DNA and go on to explain how it was done. Now, this sounds crazy, guys, but this is what these texts are telling us. They took the egg of a human and fertilized it with one of the Anunnaki gods, that they placed it in the womb of an Anunnaki female who carried this till birth and gave birth to the first Adam, the first Earthling. Over the next couple of thousand Earth years, they kept messing around with our DNA until they finally had an unstoppable race here on the Earth, us. This is where the theory of evolution falls flat on its face. The missing link. There is no missing link. We were genetically modified by the Anunnaki, and our creators warned us that there would be a flood to cleanse the earth of their creation, as detailed by almost every civilization on Earth. This is where we went about trying to save the life on Earth, as foretold in the story of Noah's Ark, according to the Bible. But in the cuneiform text, it states that Enki gave the Sumerians the blueprints as to build a massive ark. Except consider not two animals of every species, consider a male and female DNA strain on board a massive vault in an effort to preserve life on Earth and repopulate the world. This was meant to be the end of civilization, and it could answer the question as to how we forgot all the ancient knowledge. It could answer the ancient astronaut argument and also explain what happened to the lost continent of Atlantis. Perhaps the humans that survived the flood had enough knowledge to build wondrous cities in the post-apocalyptic world after the flood, and this led to a power struggle after a period of time.
All throughout history, gods and deities have been worshipped and written about by nearly every major culture on the planet, with striking similarities. With so much misinformation and suppression behind connecting the ancient past, much of this information leading back to the truth has been nearly lost to time and considered nothing more than a myth to most of society. The most important fact to understand when connecting and deciphering the events of the past correctly is that history has been written by the victors and often does not accurately reflect the events that really occurred. This shocking realization means that much of what we've been told regarding the ancient past and what we think is just a myth is not based on facts and is heavily biased and controlled. This control of historical events has polluted our understanding of who these gods really are and how they were all connected in shaping our collective reality. Earth is merely one of the billions of other habitable planets in our Milky Way galaxy alone, that would outnumber every grain of sand on all the beaches of Earth. The greatest challenge we face is through systemic ignorance and a lack of awareness of everything that exists around us. This manufactured perception blinds us from asking the important questions about our origins and how ancient civilizations of the past possess such vast knowledge and sophistication. So who really were these gods of ancient history? And what evidence is there that proves that they are real and more than just a myth? To find out the truth, we have to go back to the beginning, to the unaltered and unpolluted view of our ancient history. Following this breadcrumb trail leads us back to ancient Iraq, to one of the first developed human civilizations on Earth, known as the Sumerians. The Sumerians represent the first civilization to develop advanced writing techniques, as well as tracking events and chronicling our ancient history. The Sumerians claimed that their knowledge of the stars, writing, agriculture, and social structures were all lowered from heaven by great gods who came from a planet with a long elliptical orbit. The Sumerians left behind records indicating the existence of this planet in cuneiform writings and cylinder seals. The most famous of these is known as VA-243, which shows a scale model of our solar system, which includes our central sun and the planets that revolve around it, including Planet X, where they claim their gods came from. Today, most of society has been tricked into believing these gods in Planet X are nothing more than a myth and fairy tale to hide the truth with laughter and ridicule. This clever tactic has hidden the real version of history and our origins for generations, until over time it has been nearly lost forever. It's time for humanity to awaken from its amnesia of all of this happened before us. The Sumerians called their gods the Anunnaki, which meant those who from heaven to earth came. The Sumerians wrote in detail about both who the Anunnaki were and the events that led to their arrival on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago from Planet X. In these early cuneiform writings, such as the Atrahasis, we learn about two brothers known as Enki and Enlil, who bitterly fight over the direction of humanity, and provides details of the disasters caused by the crossing of Planet X. Much of the turmoil revolves around these two rival families and how this mysterious planet has shaped our story. Enki was a brilliant scientist and was known as the great magician and geneticist of the Anunnaki family. His symbol was represented as a dragon and serpent, and was shown through the modern medical caduceus symbol. The name En means Lord, with Ki being the original name of our planet before it was called Earth, which was later renamed for this great being Ea, a previous name of Enki. Enki's half-brother Enlil, known as the Lord of the Air or Sky, and represented by the eagle and bull, was a polar opposite of his brother. His values revolved around a military and highly disciplined mentality, whose interests solely lie in the preservation and future of the Empire of Anu. All of the Anunnaki are named after this king of the gods, who believes that he rules over Earth. The oldest and most important of these Sumerian writings is known as the Enuma Elish, which is a cuneiform tablet that speaks about our origin story and the devastation in our solar system long ago in the past. Found in 1849 in what is now the area of Mosul, Iraq, the Enuma Elish may be one of the most important pieces of writing in human history for the unaltered and extensive information given for the events of the ancient past. The Enuma Elish contains 7 tablets, with the first 5 describing the turbulent celestial events that happened long ago when these Anunnaki royal gods acted out roles as the planets of our solar system, like a grand play, with Marduk being represented as the planet X, known to the Sumerians as Nibiru, with Enlil represented as Jupiter. Reading from an excerpt from Tablet 6 of the Enuma Elish, it states, "They bound him, holding him before Enki. They inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood he, Enki, created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. After the wise Enki had created mankind and had imposed the service of the gods upon them, the task is beyond comprehension. The gods were then divided, all of the Anunnaki into upper and lower groups. He assigned 300 in the heavens to guard the decrees of Anu, and appointed them as guard." Enlil has always hated humanity and called them the beasts, referencing their primitive nature and compared to their DNA. These brothers were given ownership and responsibility over planet Earth and deemed themselves gods of everything beneath them. Most of our story, and the extensive conflict throughout humanity, all stems from the jealousy that arose between Enlil and his sons over the gifts within the human genome that were instilled secretly by using Enki's own DNA himself. We learned in the Enuma Elish in Atrahasis that the Anunnaki created humanity to ease the workload of the Ajiji, the workforce of the royal family, and to jumpstart the genetics of the Neanderthal with their own DNA to toil in the Absu, which we know is South Africa. Today, thousands if not millions of ancient mining sites, dating to over 100,000 years old, utilizing advanced smelting techniques, have been found all over the region. This is the ancient reason why we still value gold nearly above all else, and is part of our long history of slavery on the planet. We are now just waking up to the truth of all of this. The original purpose behind the creation of Homo sapiens, through the eyes of Enlil, was to become a simple slave race, with only enough intelligence to comprehend basic orders. Even the idea of giving humans more intelligence through splicing their own Anunnaki DNA greatly angered Enlil, and he fiercely opposed it. Unbeknownst to Enlil, his half-brother Enki ended up secretly designing a model of Homo sapien that was far too intelligent and possessed large amounts of Anunnaki DNA that could even rival their greatness as a species. Enki felt great responsibility and compassion for his creation, and endowed Homo sapiens with an advanced brain and higher consciousness, with chakra centers of energy that could be manipulated from a distance in the future in case humanity became enslaved by ideas. When Enlil found out that Enki had given Homo sapiens the gifts of their intelligence and the right to free will through conscious expansion, he was furious and promised to enslave humanity forever and never allow them to know the truth of who they really are. Much of the current reality stems from the promise that has always been kept and is the purpose behind the inversion of so many meanings that lead back to the truth, such as the demonization of the snake, Enki's symbol. This realization of reality can be uncomfortable to accept, but necessary for growth and perspective. When Enlil was chosen to be the ruler of Earth, instead of his half-brother Enki, a promise that had been made for the ultimate slavery of humanity was orchestrated and carried out 12,800 years ago as the planet crossing, Planet X, approached perihelion and disaster occurred across the Earth, as told by Atrahasis, who was also known as Noah. This represented the great reset button of humanity, and just the calamity needed by Enlil to permanently enslave humanity by tricking them through the conditioning of certain ideas and laws, so that society would unknowingly give all of their energy away to these gods. The popular figure of the cross, represented by Planet X, meaning the crossing or the sacrifice on the crossing through Marduk's later trickery, was implemented into religion to become a massive control system of information in controlling the minds of all of society. A profound quote to explain this deception and control by Enlil, Ninurta, and Marduk on humanity comes from Barbara Marciniak, which states, "The ultimate tyranny in a society is not controlled by martial law, but controlled by the psychological manipulation of consciousness, through which reality is defined so that those who exist within it do not even realize they are in prison." Reality as we know it will change forever once intelligent life is finally announced to the public. All of the silly distractions and ignorance that has plagued our world will melt away with astonishment and wonder once major discoveries in archaeology are revealed that lie under the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx, known as the Halls of Amenti. The Anunnaki gods follow the ancient rules laid down for the balancing of energy during zodiacal cycles. The time of Pisces featured a negative polarity, which is why we saw war dominate the planet for thousands of years. All of these changes represent the great metamorphosis of our time as we enter the positive polarity of Aquarius in the next several years to take the first step on our journey into the cosmos to join our galactic neighbors. What kind of society will we become? One focused on war and material gain by the eagle? Or higher consciousness in the lost teachings of the great dragon Enki?
Have you ever wondered why schools teach so little, if anything, about the world's first advanced civilization? Especially when it introduced so many things we still use today. Why the mystery around Sumeria, which was in Mesopotamia and what's now modern-day Iraq? After all, here are just some of what they gave us. The modern calendar, based on lunar cycles, the 60-20 counting system used for geometry and measuring time, the wheel, the plow, irrigation systems like levees and canals, sailboats. They even spoke the first known language. And, most importantly, they left evidence of the first recorded writing. That's a lot of intelligent contributions to humanity. So why aren't we taught more about this clearly advanced and influential civilization? Well, connect the dots and you'll discover why the omission could be deliberate. Sumerians were accurate in creating many advanced systems, yet we dismiss their history of man as mere mythology. And why is that? Well, if we gave the same credibility to their written history as we've given their inventions, we'd be teaching a completely different version of our origins. And we'd be thinking a lot more about what our future may hold. So let archaeologists continue to debate the history and evolution of man. If you go to the source, here's what the first civilization ever to record history revealed about our past. In 1849, a British archaeologist discovered 14 tablets in Sumeria. To date, these are the oldest known writings, and they date back to the 24th century BC. While the stories on them share much of what other ancient writings say, they put a whole new spin on the other ancient sacred texts. You see, while they do refer to a father of all beginnings, or some kind of ultimate supreme being, the tablets say that the creators in Genesis, the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, these were polytheistic gods of ours, otherworldly beings, or just plain out, they were aliens. The entire first 2 tablets explain who they were and where they were from. Tablet 3 tells of the 6 days of creation, or settlement, on Earth. Later, they explain how the human race was genetically manipulated by these beings and did not evolve randomly. Even the technology Sumerians gave us came from these beings. Are you interested now in knowing more about what the Sumerians had to say about our history? Here are selected legends from the 14 tablets and their parallels with other ancient sources. According to the Sumerian tablets, 445,000 years ago, creator gods, as they call it, came to Earth. The only inhabitants of Earth were wild and undomesticated animals, and early ancestors of man. These beings were called the Anunnaki, which means those who from heaven to earth came. The Anunnaki inhabited a distant orbiting planet called Nibiru, which only entered our solar system every 3,600 years. They describe Nibiru as many times the diameter of Earth and abundant with iron oxide, making its rivers and lakes appear red. Now, a side note about Nibiru. According to the tablets, Nibiru's atmosphere began to deteriorate and become a hostile place for life, and in order to restore it, the Anunnaki needed one important element for their atmosphere: gold. Now, here are a few interesting facts. There is proof that gold nanoparticles can be used to repair our damaged ozone. It shields radiation, which explains why NASA uses gold foils in their space stations. While NASA is currently aware of 8 official planets in our solar system, there has been much speculation about the wobbly orbit of 2 planets, which points to the likely gravitational pull of a very large mass, which has yet to be discovered. Now, detection of this mass traces back decades, but in October of 2017, NASA published an article called "The Super Earth That Came Home for Dinner," stating, there are now 5 different lines of observational evidence pointing to the existence of Planet 9. If you were to remove this explanation and imagine Planet 9 does not exist, then you generate more problems than you solve. Clearly, there is potential of another planet yet to be discovered in our solar system. Now, when the Anunnaki arrived, they were capable of living lives that spanned hundreds of thousands of years. They created a mining settlement they called Eriduk, Earth Station 1, in the Persian Gulf, under a leader named Enki. The tablets convey, after a kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eriduk. These visitors were not alone. They brought another extraterrestrial race with them. They were called the Igigi, and they worked as their slaves. The Igigi were considered inferior. They served the Anunnaki by mining gold. As civilizations grew, the Igigi endured crushing labor. And these stories are consistent with Babylonian tablets from the 18th century BC. When the gods, manlike, bore the labor, carried the load, the gods' load was great, the toil grievous, the trouble excessive. The great Anunnaki made the Igigi undertake the toil. After many centuries, the Igigi rebelled, mistakenly believing they could overcome these oppressive masters. Their defeat almost completely annihilated their race, leaving the Anunnaki without a workforce. Unable to replace the Igigi, Nibiru's ruler, Anu, ordered his son Enki to genetically engineer a new slave race, one that was intelligent enough to perform complex work but still be subservient to the Anunnaki. His experiments are recounted in detail in Atrahasis. Many unique creatures were created. Enki finally successfully met his goal, and the result? A genetic hybrid between Earth's caveman, Homo erectus, and the Anunnaki themselves. This hybrid we call Homo sapiens. The tablets called first men the Adamu. In Hebrew, Adam means man. The Anunnaki put the Homo sapiens to work in the mines and elsewhere in Mesopotamia. The Semitic word avad, or worship, literally means work for. Hence, early men had no choice but to worship their gods. According to the pictographs and texts, these Anunnaki, who we know lived many centuries, were giants compared to the Homo sapiens. Now, because their main purpose in life was to serve the Anunnaki, Homo sapiens were, in return, educated with social skills and academic affairs and technology. All this is abundantly clear in the tablets. The new human slaves were sterile, but as the demand for workforce increased, they were re-engineered so that they could reproduce. This later led to an overpopulation. So later, many humans were banished from the safety of their cities, giving rise to the story of the Garden of Eden and the story of banishment from paradise for procreating. As humans evolved to become more intelligent, some Anunnaki leaders bred with these humans. The children which resulted from these forbidden unions between races were called the Nephilim, or giants of old. Tablets say that these practices enraged Enlil, the Anu leader of that time, who was also the brother of Enki. Enlil wanted to ensure no human would ever rise to power and potentially rule Nibiru. Naturally, the interbreeding increased that risk, but it was beyond his control. Human populations increased over the following millennia, only to be met with a population control plan that nature had in store. During one of its 3,600-year cycles, Nibiru's orbit created havoc on the Sun and on Earth. Nibiru is also called the Destroyer in the Kolbrin, which is an ancient gospel found in Scotland that was omitted from biblical text, much like the Dead Sea Scrolls were. It reads, Men forgot the days of the destroyer. Only the wise know where it went, and that it shall return at the appointed time. The destroyer, its color, bright and fierce and ever-changing, was an unstable appearance, a fierce body of flames. Though stating Nibiru usually passes without causing harm, the tablets describe one cataclysmic event which occurred when Nibiru neared Earth. It says, first, black spots appeared on the sun's surface. The Earth's magnetic field became weaker, the temperature rose, and ice caps began melting. This event we call the deluge, or the Great Flood. It also reads, for days before the day of the deluge, the earth was rumbling, groaning, as if with pain. For nights before the calamity struck, in the heavens, Nibiru as a glowing star was seen. Well, according to the tablets, Enlil saw the oncoming disaster as an opportunity to rid the planet of humans that he deemed unworthy. He returned to Nibiru, but many Anunnaki chose to stay, instead witnessing the flooding and the destruction on the planet from their celestial boats which circled the earth. It reads, then there was darkness in daytime, and at night the moon as though by a monster was swallowed. The earth began to shake by a force before unknown. It was agitated. In the glow of dawn, a black cloud arose from the horizon. The morning light turned to darkness. Then the sound of a rolling thunder boomed, and lightning lit the skies. On that day, on that unforgettable day, the deluge with a roar began. At that point, the South Pole's huge ice sheets collided and fell into the ocean. This would have created tsunamis everywhere, traveling north to the gold mines in Southeast Africa. The tidal wave continued north until it reached and submerged the city of Eden, one of the first Anunnaki settlements on Earth, now located somewhere at the bottom of today's Persian Gulf. Witnessing the cataclysm, Enki, who felt sympathy for his creations, instructed his chosen ones to build boats. Among these few humans was Zayasudra, we know as Noah, and his family. A great storm with heavy rains started. The tidal wave kept sweeping the earth for 7 days until it finally came to a halt. But the heavy rains continued for 40 more days and nights. The story of the deluge is recorded in almost every civilization on our planet. Core ice samples taken from Greenland and Antarctica illustrate that at the height of the last ice age, the sea levels were 425 feet lower than they are today. And, more importantly, there is a clear indication of a rapid sea rise. After the deluge, reconstruction of a new spaceport began. The text describes how the Anunnaki made their buildings according to the position of the stars. It reads, let the heart of the plane, the heavens, reflect. Once Enki to this agreed, Enlil from the skies of distances took measures. Indeed, the pyramids, now questioned to be much older than originally determined, and many other ancient monuments are, in fact, aligned to the stars. When the Anunnaki finally left Earth, their influence had reached every corner of the world, from Mesopotamia to India to South America. Before they left, they gifted humanity the Sumerian civilization, which was inexplicably advanced for its time, having made a sort of a sudden appearance as a mature and highly organized culture that came out of nowhere. The Anunnaki taught the Sumerians their way of life and established monarchs. Now here's where it gets interesting. The kings would act as their emissaries on Earth and rule the people according to ancient principles. Unbeknownst to man, royal bloodlines were genetically manipulated by the Anunnaki. This would in turn explain the strong aversion by nobility to interclass breeding. Some people speculate that the Anunnaki have deceptively managed to control the earth through this selective breeding of nobility for centuries, millennia. Others speculate that, as the tablets indicate, Nibiru may once again come close to our planet, and then the Anunnaki will return and restore rule over the slave race they created. This would explain the secrecy around the Sumerian recorded history. Either way, 3,600 years approaches a new cycle. So now that you know what ancients reveal about our origins, perhaps you'd like to decide.
The Rh negative recessive trait. There are currently only two Rh factor classifications. When related to your blood type, you are either considered to be Rh positive or Rh negative. This is because if you have any Rh positive blood in your body, you are called Rh positive. However, in some cases, an Rh positive person is born to an Rh negative person. Since we each receive one blood type, the letter, and one Rh factor, a plus or minus, from each parent, we actually have two. After birth, our blood type is simplified like a mathematical equation, and we end up referring to our blood type as one letter and one Rh factor. However, that portion of the full blood type that was part of the original equation does not just disappear. It will always be with you as a recessive trait. As you can see on the illustration, when an Rh negative mom procreates with an Rh positive man, their offspring will actually be Rh positive negative, yet will be referred to as Rh positive. Two Rh positive negative parents conceive a child. They each have the option or the possibility of passing the Rh positive or the Rh negative factor to their child. If they both pass down the Rh negative half of themselves, the child will be Rh negative negative. If they both pass down the Rh positive half of themselves, the child will be Rh positive positive. However, if one parent passed down their Rh negative half and the other parents pass down the Rh positive half, the child will be Rh positive negative in true blood type. They will be classified as Rh positive, but will always carry the recessive Rh factor, just as the parents did. You will notice that the writer often refers to these people as the Rh battery, Rh plus minus, as it is a very simple way to visualize how the Rh negative factor can be recessive in someone's family and blood type. The same simple process occurs with our actual blood type letter as well. Very, very interesting article.